The sky above 7 burned orange and red. It had been burning for 6 days now. Commander stood at the observation window of the underground bunker and watched another defense tower fall in the distance. The explosion lit up the horizon like a second sunrise, and then there was nothing but smoke and the endless sound of the swarm. She was tired, not the kind of tired that sleep could fix. This was something deeper, something that had settled into her bones over the past 3 weeks as she watched her coalition fall apart piece by piece. Behind her, the command room was filled with officers from 12 different species. The tall, thin figures of the stood near the tactical displays, their silver skin reflecting the red warning lights that never stopped flashing. The massive commanders sat in reinforced chairs, their heavy breathing filling the silences between explosions. Representatives from and 7 other species clustered around holographic maps that showed nothing but bad news. They had come to 7 with the finest fleet the Galactic Union had ever assembled. 18,000 ships, 4 million soldiers, weapons that could crack moons and shields that could stop stars. None of it mattered. The Hollow did not care about their technology. The Hollow did not negotiate or retreat or feel fear. They simply consumed. World after world, system after system, they spread across the galaxy like a disease that could not be cured. And now they were here on this small planet at the edge of Union space, and they were winning. Turned away from the window. "Status report," she said. Her voice was calm. It had to be. If she showed fear, the others would break completely. An officer stepped forward. His name was something long and musical that had never learned to pronounce correctly. "The eastern perimeter has fallen," he said. "We have pulled all surviving forces back to the inner shield zone. Current estimates suggest we have 72 hours before the shield generators fail. And reinforcements." The silver face showed no emotion, but his voice carried something like shame. "The Union High Command has classified 7 as a lost cause. All available fleets have been redirected to defend the inner systems. We are on our own." The room went quiet. Could feel the despair spreading like poison through the air. She looked at the faces around her. The proud, who had never lost a war in 10,000 years. The ancient, who had mapped the stars before most species had discovered fire. The fierce, whose warriors were legendary across 100 systems. All of them were afraid. All of them were ready to give up. "There must be someone," said, "someone who can reach us in time." A general made a sound that might have been a laugh. "Who? Every major power in the Union has turned their backs on us. The Hollow are too strong. No one wants to throw away ships and soldiers on a battle that cannot be won." Closed her eyes. He was right. She knew he was right, but she could not accept it. There had to be something, someone, some option they had not considered. And then she remembered. What about Earth? The room went silent again, but this time it was a different kind of silence. Not despair, confusion. A few of the officers exchanged glances that could not read. "Earth," they repeated slowly, "the human." "Yes, they joined the Union 2 centuries ago. They have a military, they have ships." The general shook his massive head. "Commander, with respect, the humans are barely a spacefaring species. They have no experience with conflicts of this scale. Their technology is primitive compared to ours. What could they possibly offer that our combined forces have not already tried and failed?" "I do not know," admitted, "but I have read their files, the classified ones, the ones the Union tried to bury." Something changed in the room. The officers leaned forward slightly. Even who rarely showed interest in anything except battle, seemed curious. "What files?" they asked. Walked to the central display and entered a code she had memorized years ago, back when she was a junior intelligence officer with too much curiosity and not enough sense. The holographic display flickered, and then a new set of images appeared. They showed Earth, a small blue planet, beautiful and fragile, and they showed what had happened on that planet over the course of human history. Wars, hundreds of them, thousands of them. Wars fought with rocks and sticks and metal blades. Wars fought with chemical explosives and nuclear fire. Wars fought in trenches filled with mud and blood, in cities reduced to rubble, in jungles and deserts and frozen wastelands. The officers watched in silence as the images scrolled past. Battles that lasted for years. Sieges that lasted for decades. Entire generations born and raised in conflict, knowing nothing but fighting and survival. "They call themselves a peaceful species now," said quietly. "And perhaps they are. But for most of their history, humans have been at war with each other. Not for territory or resources, although those were often the excuses. They fought because it was in their nature, because something inside them refused to surrender, no matter the cost." She paused on an image of a human city in ruins. Small figures moved through the wreckage, carrying weapons and wounded companions. The file said the city was called Stalingrad, and the battle for it had lasted for 5 months in the middle of winter. "They have a word," continued, "a word that does not translate well into any Union language. They call it spite. It means to keep fighting not because you believe you can win, but because you refuse to let your enemy have the satisfaction of your defeat." The general was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Even if what you say is true, even if humans are as stubborn as these files suggest, what can a handful of primitive soldiers do against the Hollow? We have millions of troops with the finest weapons in the galaxy, and we are losing." "I do not know," said again. "But we have no other options. We have 72 hours. It costs us nothing to ask." She walked to the communication station and began entering coordinates. The other officers did not stop her. Perhaps they thought it was pointless. Perhaps they simply did not have the energy to argue anymore. The message was simple, did not have time for diplomatic language or formal protocols. She simply told the truth. She described the situation on 7. She listed the forces they had lost and the forces they had left. She explained that the Union had abandoned them and that the Hollow would break through their defenses within 3 days. And then she added one final line, "We are begging for reinforcements. Anyone, anything, please." She sent the message toward the distant star that humans called Sol. Then she sat down in a chair that was not designed for her species and closed her eyes. The others returned to their duties. Maps were studied. Defensive positions were adjusted. Wounded soldiers were treated and dead soldiers were counted. No one spoke about the message to Earth. It was a foolish hope, and they all knew it. 3 days passed slowly. The shield flickered and failed in the north. The Hollow pushed closer. Soldiers died in the darkness, their screams lost in the endless chittering of the swarm. And then, on the morning of the 3rd day, something appeared on the long-range sensors. It was a ship, a single ship dropping out of hyperspace at the edge of the system. It was small and ugly and covered in scars. It looked like it had been beaten and burned and rebuilt a dozen times. Its hull was painted matte black, and on its side, written in white letters that the translation system struggled to process, was a name. "The Last Resort." Stared at the display. Behind her, the other officers gathered, their earlier dismissiveness replaced by something that might have been hope or might have been fear. The humans had come. 3. The ship landed in the central courtyard of the bunker complex, its engines screaming as they fought against the planet's gravity. Smoke and dust filled the air, and for a moment no one could see anything. The coalition soldiers who had gathered to watch stood in nervous clusters, their weapons held loosely, unsure whether to feel relieved or disappointed. When the dust cleared, they saw the ship clearly for the first time. It was worse than the sensor images had suggested. The hull was covered in patches and welds, layers of repairs built on top of older repairs. Scorch marks ran along the sides like old scars. One of the landing struts was slightly bent, giving the whole vessel a tired, crooked appearance. The general stood beside, his arms crossed over his broad chest. "This is what they sent," he said. It was not a question. Before could respond, the ship's main hatch opened with a grinding sound of metal against metal. A ramp extended, and figures began to walk down into the orange light of the burning sky. Counted them as they emerged. 47. 47 humans in mismatched armor and worn clothing. Some carried large bags of equipment. Others carried weapons that looked ancient compared to the energy rifles used by Union forces. A few walked with visible limps or supported themselves on canes. At the front of the group was a woman. She was not tall, not physically impressive in any way that could identify. Her hair was cut short and going gray at the edges. Her face was lined with age and something else, something harder to name. She walked with a slight limp, favoring her left leg, but she did not slow down or show any sign of pain. Behind her walked a man who was nearly twice her size. His shoulders were broad, his hands were large, and his face carried the expression of someone who had seen terrible things and learned to live with them. He carried no weapon that could see, but something about the way he moved made her think he did not need one. The woman stopped in front of and looked up at her. Humans were small compared to most Union species. This woman barely came up to his chest, but when their eyes met, felt something strange, something she had not felt in weeks. She felt like someone was finally taking the situation seriously. "I am Captain," the woman said. Her voice was rough like stones grinding together. "Earth Defense Force, retired. This is my second in command." The large man nodded, but did not speak. Glanced at the small group of humans, then back at, "Captain, we requested reinforcements. We are facing an enemy that has destroyed millions of our soldiers. We need armies, fleets, weapons." "You need people who know how to fight when everything has already gone wrong," said. "That is what we are." The general stepped forward. His shadow fell over like a mountain blocking the sun. "Human, I have led armies of 100,000 warriors. I have conquered star systems. I have faced enemies that would make your species weep with fear. And I am telling you that 47 soldiers, no matter how brave, cannot change the outcome of this battle." Looked up at him. She did not step back. She did not blink. "Then why are you losing?" The general's face darkened with anger. For a moment, thought he might strike the human. But then something changed. The anger faded, replaced by something that looked almost like confusion. "We have superior numbers," he said slowly. "Superior technology, superior training." "And you are still losing," repeated. "So maybe those things are not as important as you thought." She turned away from him and faced. "Commander, I need a complete map of enemy positions. I need information about their behavior patterns, their weaknesses, their habits. And I need 3 hours of rest for my people. We have been traveling for 72 hours without sleep." "3 hours?" asked. "The Hollow are pressing against our shields. We do not have time for rest." "You have time for 3 hours," said. "Trust me." There was something in her voice that made argument feel pointless. Nodded and gestured for an aide to prepare quarters for the human team. As the humans filed past, studied them more closely. There was a young woman with quick eyes who seemed to notice everything around her. A man with burned scars covering half his face, carrying a heavy bag that clanked with metal tools. An older soldier with white hair and hands that never stopped moving, adjusting straps and checking equipment. A young man, barely more than a boy, who walked with the careful steps of someone who had learned that the ground could not always be trusted. None of them looked like elite soldiers. None of them looked like the kind of warriors who could turn the tide of a hopeless war. They looked tired and worn and ordinary. But there was something else. Something in the way they moved together, anticipated each other's steps, communicated with glances instead of words. These were people who had trained together, fought together, survived together. They were not 47 individuals. They were a single unit with 47 bodies. The officer appeared at side. "Commander, shall I assign guards to watch them?" No, said quietly. I do not think they would appreciate it. 3 hours passed. The shield generators continued to fail. The hollow continued to advance. Officers argued about evacuation plans and last stands and ways to send messages to loved ones before the end. And then, without announcement or fanfare, the humans emerged from their quarters. They had changed. Their mismatched armor had been adjusted and secured. Their ancient weapons had been cleaned and loaded. They moved in silence, shadows flowing through the bunker corridors without disturbing the air around them. Found in the command room. We have studied your maps, she said. The eastern breeding pit. That is where the Hollow are producing new soldiers. Yes, we have tried to destroy it 4 times. We lost 800 soldiers in the last attempt. You used a direct assault. We used the only strategy that made sense, overwhelming force. Smiled, it was not a happy expression. There are other strategies, older ones. My people used to hunt animals much larger and stronger than ourselves. We did not charge at them head-on. We waited. We watched. We learned their patterns. And then we killed them in ways they never expected. The Hollow are not animals, the general said. He had been listening from across the room. They are a hive mind, they adapt, they learn. So do we, said. She turned too. We are going to leave the shield perimeter tonight. We are going to destroy the eastern breeding pit. When we return, you will understand what Earth has sent you. And if you do not return, then you will be in the same position you were in before we arrived. You will have lost nothing. Wanted to argue. She wanted to explain that she could not simply let 47 soldiers walk into certain death, even if they were volunteers. But something stopped her. Something in the way stood, the way she spoke, the absolute certainty in her eyes. What do you need from us? Asked. Nothing. Just do not send anyone after us. And do not be alarmed if you see fires on the horizon. That night, the humans slipped out of the bunker through a maintenance tunnel that the coalition had forgotten existed. They carried no lights, made no sound, and left no traces of their passage. The officers in the command room watched the sensor displays for hours, waiting for the red dots that would indicate human life signs, waiting for the sudden cluster of movement that would mean the Hollow had found them. They saw nothing. The humans had vanished into the darkness like ghosts. And then, just before dawn, the eastern horizon lit up with fire. Not the orange fire of the burning sky, but something brighter. Something that burned blue and white and kept burning even as the sun began to rise. The breeding pit was gone. Stood at the observation window and watched the smoke rise. Behind her, the command room was completely silent. No one spoke. No one moved. They simply stared at the distant flames and tried to understand what had just happened. An hour later, the humans returned. There were 43 of them now. 4 had not come back. They walked into the bunker covered in blood and ash and something dark that might have been hollow ichor. Their weapons were empty. Their faces were blank. Stopped in front of. She was bleeding from a cut on her forehead, and her limp was worse than before. But her voice was steady. The breeding pit is destroyed, she said. You will not face new Hollow soldiers from the east. Now, Commander, would you like to hear our plan for the rest of them? The helmet camera footage played on the main display in the command room. Every officer in the coalition had gathered to watch. No one spoke. No one moved. They simply stared at the images and tried to understand what they were seeing. The footage was dark and shaky, captured by cameras mounted on human helmets as they moved through the night. The first clip showed a narrow canyon, walls of rock rising on either side. A young woman was visible in the frame, her face lit by distant fires. Her name, according to the file, was. She was running. Behind her, the sound of the Hollow filled the audio, a clicking and scraping noise like 1,000 knives being sharpened at once. The camera turned, and for a moment the viewers could see what was chasing her. Hundreds of Hollow drones, their black bodies reflecting the moonlight, their legs carrying them forward with horrible speed. Did not slow down. She did not look back. She ran deeper into the canyon, leading the swarm away from something they could not see. And then she stopped. She pressed herself against the canyon wall. She raised one hand and made a fist. The walls exploded. The humans had planted charges in the rock hours earlier, before the hollow even knew they were there. Thousands of tons of stone came crashing down, burying the swarm under a mountain of rubble. The sound was deafening even through the recording equipment. When the dust cleared, was already moving again. She climbed over the rocks and disappeared into the darkness, heading toward the next objective. The general made a sound that did not recognize. It might have been surprise, it might have been respect. She used herself as bait, he said quietly. She let them chase her into a trap. Yes, said. He stood at the edge of the room, watching the footage with the same blank expression he always wore. Is very good at making enemies chase her. She says it is because she has a face people want to hit. The next clip showed a different scene. A small building, some kind of fuel storage facility that the Hollow had captured. An engineer named Minu was inside, working on the pipes and valves with steady hands. In the background, the audio picked up the sound of claws against metal. The Hollow were trying to break through the door. Minu did not hurry. He did not panic. He simply continued his work, connecting wires and adjusting gauges, while the door behind him bent and buckled under the assault. "What is he doing?" one of the officers asked. "Why does he not run?" "Watch," said. Minu finished his work and stepped back. He pulled something from his pocket, a small device, simple and crude, a detonator. The door finally gave way. Hollow drones poured into the room, their mandibles clicking with hunger. Minu pressed the button and walked calmly toward a small window at the back of the building. The fuel tanks exploded. The entire facility became a ball of fire, consuming everything inside. The camera feed went white, then dark. "He is dead," they said. But then the feed returned. Minu was outside, rolling on the ground to put out the flames on his jacket. His face was burned. His hands were bleeding, but he was alive, and behind him, the breeding pit's fuel supply was gone. Watched the footage with growing amazement. These were not the tactics she had learned in military academy. There was no elegance here, no grand strategy, no overwhelming force. This was something older and darker. This was desperation refined into an art form. "How do they do this?" she asked. "How do they stay so calm?" Was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "They are not calm. Every one of them is terrified. But fear is useful. It keeps you alert. It keeps you moving. We learned a long time ago that courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is being afraid and doing what must be done anyway." The footage continued. Clip after clip of impossible situations and impossible survivals. A soldier named held a narrow bridge for 20 minutes while his companions escaped, fighting hand to hand with hollow warriors twice his size. A woman named crawled through ventilation shafts too small for the drones to follow, planting explosives in places the enemy never thought to guard. And through it all, Captain moved like a ghost. She appeared in nearly every clip, giving orders without raising her voice, adjusting plans on the fly, pulling wounded soldiers to safety with her bare hands. Her limp did not slow her down. Nothing slowed her down. When the footage ended, the command room was silent for a long time. Finally, the general spoke. "In 10,000 years of war, I have never seen anything like this. Your people fight like they have nothing to lose." "We have everything to lose," said. "That is why we fight this way." "I do not understand." Walked to the display and pulled up an image of Earth, the small blue planet hanging in the darkness of space. For most of our history, this was the only world we had. When enemies came, we could not run to another star. When resources ran out, we could not find another planet. Everything we were, everything we would ever be, existed on this one small world. He paused, looking at the image with something like sadness. We learned that survival is not guaranteed. We learned that the universe does not care if we live or die. And we learned that when your back is against the wall, when there is nowhere left to run, the only option is to fight with everything you have. But you have other worlds now, said. Earth is part of the Galactic Union. You have colonies and ships and resources. Yes, but the lesson remains. Turn to face her. Every human carries a piece of that history. We remember what it was like to be alone, to be afraid, to face extinction with nothing but our hands and our will. Your species have been conquering stars for thousands of years. You have forgotten what it means to truly fight for survival. We have not. The room was quiet again. Looked at the faces of her coalition officers. She saw something she had not seen in weeks. Not hope exactly, but something close to it. Something that looked like the beginning of belief. That night found Captain alone in one of the observation rooms. The human woman stood at the window, looking out at the fires on the horizon. Her face was unreadable. Captain said, "May I ask you something?" Did not turn around, you may. Your people have lost 4 soldiers tonight, 4 lives, and tomorrow you will go out again and lose more. How do you carry that weight? How do you keep giving orders that send your people to their deaths? For a long moment did not answer. Then she said, I have been fighting wars for 40 years. I have given orders that killed good soldiers. I have made mistakes that cost lives. I have buried friends and enemies and sometimes could not tell the difference. She turned to face. Her eyes were tired but clear. I carry the weight because someone must, because if I break, they break, because every soldier who dies under my command gave their life for something, and if I give up, if I stop fighting, then their deaths mean nothing. But how do you live with it? How do you sleep at night? Smiled. It was a sad smile filled with something that could not name. I do not. Not really. None of us do, but we keep going anyway because stopping is not an option. She walked toward the door, then paused. Commander, your soldiers are brave. Your technology is impressive. But you have been fighting this war like it is a game, like there are rules and fairness and second chances. The Hollow do not play games. They will eat this world and everyone on it without hesitation or mercy. Then what should we do? Stop fighting to win, said. Start fighting to survive. There is a difference, and that difference is everything. She walked out of the room, leaving alone with the fires and the darkness, and a new understanding of what humanity had brought to this war. The Hollow Queen arrived on the 7th day. Every sensor in the bunker screamed at once. Every display lit up with warnings. Every officer in the command room stopped what they were doing and stared at the image that appeared on the main screen. It was not a creature in any sense that understood. It was a continent. A living, moving mass of flesh and chitin that stretched across the horizon like a mountain range come to life. Billions of smaller hollow drones swarmed around it like flies around a corpse, each one connected to the Queen's mind, each one an extension of her terrible will. The command room fell silent, not the silence of concentration or thought, but the silence of complete despair. Looked at her officers and saw the same expression on every face. It was over. Nothing could stop something that size. Nothing could even slow it down. The general was the first to speak. His voice was hollow, empty of the pride that had defined him. We have no weapons capable of harming it. Our largest bombs would be like insect bites to something that vast. The officer nodded slowly. The Union records contain no instance of a Hollow Queen being killed. When they appear, civilizations fall. That is simply how it has always been. Wanted to argue. She wanted to find some reason for hope, some plan that could save them. But she had nothing. The Queen was too big, too powerful, too alien. It was like trying to fight the ocean or the sky. And then walked into the command room. She was covered in dirt and dried blood. Her armor was cracked in several places. She had lost one of her boots somewhere and walked with bare feet on the cold metal floor. But her eyes were clear, and when she looked at the image of the queen, she did not show fear. "How big is its brain?" she asked. The officers stared at her. The question seemed absurd, meaningless in the face of such overwhelming power. "How big is its brain?" repeated. "Every creature has a brain, a central control system, something that coordinates all the pieces. Where is the queen's?" The officer recovered first. His fingers moved across the display, pulling up biological scans and sensor data. The neural cluster is located near the center of the mass, approximately 2 kilometers beneath the surface, but there is no way to reach it. The queen's body is protected by layers of armor and tissue that can regenerate faster than we can damage them. "Then we do not try to damage them," said. "We go through them." The room went quiet again, but this time it was a different kind of silence. This was the silence of people trying to understand something that should not make sense. "Explain," said. Walked to the display and pointed at the queen's massive form. "Your artillery can wound it. Not badly, not permanently, but enough to create an opening. A tunnel, if you concentrate your fire on a single point. If you burn through the outer layers, you can create a path to the inside." "And then what?" the general asked. "Even if we create an opening, the queen will heal. The path will close before anyone can reach the neural cluster." "Not if they move fast enough." Turn to face the room. "I need volunteers. A small team, light and quick. We go in through the wound channel, move faster than the queen can heal, and plant a bomb directly on the neural cluster, something big enough to destroy it from the inside." "That is suicide," they said. "Yes," agreed, "it is." No one spoke. The image of the queen filled the screen behind, a living mountain of death and hunger, and in front of it stood this small human woman, calmly discussing how she planned to walk into its heart and kill it. "You cannot ask your people to do this," said quietly. "Not even for survival, this is too much." "I am not asking them," said. "I already know what they will say." She turned and walked out of the command room. Followed her, not knowing why, just knowing that she could not let this happen without understanding it. The humans had gathered in one of the storage rooms they had claimed as their barracks. There were 38 of them now, the survivors of 7 days of fighting. They were exhausted, wounded, running on nothing but stubbornness and something that was beginning to think might be madness. Stood in front of them, she did not give a speech. She did not try to inspire them or convince them. She simply explained the situation. The queen, the neural cluster, the wound channel, the bomb. When she finished, she said, "This is not an order, this is not a mission, this is a choice. We are probably going to die, but if we succeed, we save everyone on this planet, maybe more than that." She paused. "Who is coming with me?" Every hand in the room went up, without hesitation, without discussion. 38 broken, bleeding, exhausted soldiers raised their hands and volunteered to die. Felt something in her chest that she could not name. It was not quite sadness. It was not quite pride. It was something older, something that lived in the part of her that still remembered what it meant to believe in things. Stepped forward. "I will carry the bomb. I am the strongest. I can move the fastest with the weight." But shook her head. "No, the bomb goes to." The young woman looked up. She was the smallest member of the team, barely out of childhood by human standards. Her eyes went wide. "Captain, I am not the strongest. I am not the most experienced." "You are the fastest," said. "Speed is what matters. You can run when the rest of us cannot. You can keep moving when the path starts to close. You will reach the neural cluster because no one else can." Was quiet for a long moment, then she nodded. "I understand." The attack began at midnight. Every artillery piece the coalition had left fired at a single point on the queen's body. The air filled with fire and thunder. The queen screamed, a sound that shook the ground and made the walls of the bunker crack. Her drones surged forward in a wave of black bodies, trying to stop the assault, but the coalition soldiers held them back. And through the chaos, 38 humans ran toward the wound. Watched from the command room. The cameras showed flashes of movement, brief glimpses of the team as they entered the Queen's body. The wound channel was a tunnel of burning flesh and regenerating tissue, walls that pulsed and contracted around them. They lost 7 soldiers in the first 100 meters, crushed by closing walls, burned by acidic fluids, taken by the drones that lived inside the Queen's body like white blood cells fighting an infection. His voice came through the communication system, calm and steady despite everything. "Keep moving. Do not stop for anything. You are doing well. Stay close to." The footage was terrible, darkness broken by muzzle flashes, screams that cut off suddenly, the constant sound of flesh moving, healing, trying to close around them. They lost 12 more in the second kilometer. The path was narrowing faster than they could move. The Queen was healing around them, trying to crush them like a body fighting off a disease. And then they reached it, the neural cluster, a massive sphere of glowing tissue, pulsing with energy, connected to the rest of the Queen by thousands of neural threads, the heart of the beast. Pulled the bomb from her pack. It was small, a silver cylinder that fit in one hand. Inside was enough antimatter to destroy a small moon. "Set the timer for 30 seconds, said, "then run." "There is nowhere to run," said. Her voice was quiet but steady. "The path closed behind us 2 minutes ago." The camera showed her face. She was young and scared and completely at peace with what was about to happen. "Then set it for 5 seconds, said, "and make it count." Nodded, she placed the bomb against the neural cluster. Her fingers found the controls. "Captain," she said, "it was an honor." "The honor was mine, soldier." "Press the button." The feed went white. And then across the horizon, the Queen began to fall. The Queen died slowly. It took nearly an hour for the massive body to stop moving. Watch from the observation window as the continent of flesh collapsed, section by section, like a mountain crumbling into the sea. Across the planet, hollow drones fell where they stood. Their connection to the Queen's mind was severed, and without her guidance, they were nothing but empty shells. The silence was almost unbearable. After weeks of constant battle, constant screaming, constant death, the sudden quiet felt like a physical weight pressing down on everything. No one celebrated. No one cheered. The officers in the command room simply stood and stared at the displays, trying to process what had just happened. They had won. Against all odds, against all logic, against everything they thought they understood about war and survival, they had won. But the cost? Looked at the life sign monitors. 38 humans had entered the Queen. The displays showed 30 of them as flatlines, their signals lost somewhere in the burning wreckage of the dead monster. And then through the static, a voice. It was weak, broken by interference and distance, but it was unmistakably human's voice. "Package delivered. 8 of us made it out, requesting extraction." The room exploded into movement. Officers shouted orders. Medical teams were dispatched. Rescue ships launched from the bunker and flew toward the coordinates that the surviving humans were broadcasting. Ran to the landing zone. She did not know why. She was the commander of this base, and there were 1,000 things that needed her attention. But something pulled her forward, some need to see with her own eyes what remained of the people who had saved her world. The rescue ships returned 20 minutes later. They landed in the same courtyard where the last resort had touched down a week ago. The hatches opened, and medical teams rushed inside to help with the wounded. 8 figures emerged from the ships. Captain was first. She was barely walking, supported by on one side and a medical officer on the other. Her face was burned, her uniform was in tatters, and her left arm hung at an angle that suggested multiple broken bones. But she was alive. Behind her came the others, the young specialist who had used herself as bait in the canyon. Her right leg was gone below the knee, and she hopped forward on a makeshift crutch. Minu, the engineer, his face now covered in fresh burns that would join the old ones. The soldier who had held the bridge, carried on a stretcher because he could no longer walk at all. And the youngest, the fastest, the one who had carried the bomb into the heart of the beast and somehow survived. She walked on her own, though every step seemed to cause her pain. Her skin was covered in chemical burns from the Queen's internal fluids. Her hair was gone, burned away along with most of her equipment. She looked like something that had crawled out of a fire, because that was exactly what she was. But she was smiling, a small, exhausted smile that seemed to say, "We did it. Against everything, we did it." The coalition soldiers lined the path from the landing zone to the medical facilities. Thousands of them, representatives of 12 species, warriors who had conquered star systems and defended civilizations. They stood in perfect silence as the 8 humans passed. No one spoke, no one saluted. They simply watched and in their eyes saw something that would never leave them. They had witnessed something impossible. They had seen what humans were capable of when everything was lost. One of the commanders, a massive creature who had never shown respect to anyone outside his own species, slowly lowered his great head as passed. It was a gesture of honor, the highest recognition his people could offer. Others followed, and then, bowing their heads to the broken soldiers who had saved them all, stepped forward as approached. The human woman looked up at her with eyes that had seen too much, survived too much, lost too much. "Captain," said, her voice caught in her throat, "I do not have words." "Then do not use them," said. Her voice was rough, barely more than a whisper. "Words are not what matters. We came because you called. We fought because it was right. That is all." But why? The question had been burning in his mind since the first moment she saw the last resort drop out of hyperspace. "You did not know us. You owed us nothing. We had given up hope and you crossed the galaxy to die for strangers. Why?" Was quiet for a long moment. Then she looked at with something in her eyes that was almost gentle. "Because that is what we do. When someone is in trouble, when someone is scared, when someone needs help, we answer. Not because of politics or treaties or promises of reward. Because it is right. Because we have been alone and afraid, and we know what it means to have someone come when you call." She reached out and touched his arm with her unbroken hand. "You called for help. That was enough. It will always be enough." The medical teams took her then, guiding her toward the treatment facilities, stood in the courtyard and watched as the 8 survivors disappeared into the building. 8 out of 47. 39 lives given for a world that was not their own, for people they had never met, for a cause that was not their fight. In the weeks that followed, the Galactic Union launched investigations. Reports were written. Strategies were analyzed. Military experts from 100 worlds studied the footage and the tactics and the impossible victory on 7. But the document that truly mattered was not the official report. It was a short message that spread quietly through the military commands of every species in the Union. It had no author, no official source. It simply appeared one day and never stopped circulating. The message was titled, "What Earth Sends." It began with a simple statement. When the coalition on 7 called for reinforcements, Earth sent 47 soldiers. They were not the strongest or the fastest or the most technologically advanced. They were humans. The message described what had happened: the breeding pits destroyed, the impossible tactics, the suicide mission into the Queen's heart. It described how humans fought not because they were confident of victory, but because they refused to accept defeat. It described how they turned fear into fuel and desperation into strategy. And it ended with a warning. These humans crossed the galaxy to die for strangers. They fought through fire and acid and the bodies of monsters because someone asked for help. They sacrificed everything not for glory or reward, but because it was the right thing to do. Remember this. Remember what they do for people they do not know. And then ask yourself, what would they do for their own? What would they do for their families, their homes, their world? What would they become if you threatened the things they truly loved? When you face extinction, pray that humanity answers your call. They may be your only hope. But when you consider making them your enemy, when you think about testing their limits or threatening their peace, remember 7. Remember 47 soldiers walking into certain death because someone asked for help. And then choose very carefully what you do next. The message had no official status. No government acknowledged it. No military command admitted to writing it. But every officer in the Galactic Union read it. Every species that had ever looked at humanity and seen only a young, weak, primitive civilization read those words and began to understand. Earth was not a threat because of its weapons or its ships or its technology. Earth was a threat because of what its people were willing to do. Because somewhere in their history, in their blood, in the very core of their nature, humans had learned that survival was not a gift. It was something you fought for, bled for, died for. And when they fought, they did not stop. No matter the cost, no matter the odds, no matter how impossible the victory seemed. They did not stop. On 7, the reconstruction began. The dead were buried, the wounded were healed, and slowly, piece by piece, life returned to normal. The coalition forces celebrated their victory and mourned their losses. The Hollow were defeated, at least for now. And in a quiet medical room in the main bunker, Captain sat by a window and watched the sun rise over a world that was still alive, because 47 humans had refused to let it die. She was tired. Every bone in her body ached. The doctors said she would never walk without a limp again, that her arm would never fully heal, that she had given too much of herself to this fight. But when she looked at the sunrise, she smiled. It had been worth it, all of it. Every scar, every loss, every moment of terror and pain. Because somewhere out there, strangers were alive who would not have been. Children would grow up who would never know how close they came to extinction. Futures existed that would not have been possible. That was what mattered. That was what humans fought for, not glory or power or conquest. Just the chance to see another sunrise on a world that deserved to live. And that chance was always, always worth fighting for.